It's been said that family is the greatest blessing in life, but sometimes it can also be the source of our deepest wounds. My name is Barbara Wilson, and for 34 years, I believed that the sacrifices I made for my family would someday be returned with gratitude and love. I was wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The moment I realized the true nature of my relationship with my son and daughter-in-law wasn't when they forgot my birthday, or when they asked me to babysit for the 5th weekend in a row. It was when my daughter-in-law Jennifer looked me straight in the eye and said, "We think it would be best if you skipped Christmas with us this year. Thomas and Diana are hosting, and honestly, Barbara, you just don't fit in." Those words shattered something inside me. After everything I had done, after the countless nights I'd spent awake with a sick child, after draining my retirement savings to help them buy their dream home, after silently paying their mortgage for 3 years, I was being told I didn't belong in my own son's life during the holidays. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. If I wasn't family enough to sit at their Christmas table, then perhaps I wasn't family enough to continue paying for the roof over their heads. What happened next changed everything, for them, and especially for me. I never expected my life to turn out this way. At 62, I thought I'd be surrounded by family, perhaps spending my retirement years gardening and spoiling grandchildren. Instead, I found myself alone in a house that felt too big, too empty, holding decades of memories that suddenly seemed to mock me. My journey began in Oak Ridge, Pennsylvania, a town just large enough to have its own hospital but small enough that everyone still knew each other's business. I started working as a nurse at St. Mary's Medical Center right after nursing school, and that's where I met Robert, my late husband. He was a hospital administrator with the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. We married young, bought a modest house on Maple Street, and planned for a big family. Life, however, had other plans. After years of trying, we were blessed with only one child, Michael. From the moment he was placed in my arms, I knew I would do anything for him. When he was diagnosed with severe asthma at age 3, I reduced my hours at the hospital to care for him. Those nights spent monitoring his breathing, rushing to the emergency room at the first sign of an attack. They bonded us in a way I thought was unbreakable. Robert and I poured everything into giving Michael the best life possible. We saved for his college education, driving older cars and cutting corners where we could. When he showed interest in computers, we scrimped and saved to buy him his first desktop. When he wanted to attend summer coding camps, I picked up extra shifts to make it happen. Robert never got to see Michael graduate from college. A sudden heart attack took him when Michael was just 20, leaving me a widow at 44. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses and remaining mortgage payments. I was devastated, but I had Michael to think about. I couldn't fall apart. "Mom, maybe you should sell the house," Michael suggested one evening about a month after we lost Robert. "It's too big for just you, and the money could help with my tuition." I remember feeling a twinge of hurt at his words. This was our family home, filled with memories of Robert, but I brushed it aside. Of course, Michael was thinking practically. He was grieving too, in his own way. "This is our home," I told him gently. "Your father and I worked hard for it. Besides, where would you stay during breaks? No, I'll pick up extra shifts instead." And that's exactly what I did. For the next 3 years, I worked 60-hour weeks, often taking the overnight shifts no one wanted. By the time Michael graduated with his computer science degree, I was exhausted but proud. He was the first in our family to receive a college education. "I did it, Mom," he said, hugging me after the ceremony. "I couldn't have done it without you." Those words meant everything to me at the time. Michael landed a job at a tech company in Oak Ridge, which meant he wouldn't have to move away. I was overjoyed. As he settled into his career, I continued. Working at the hospital, where Dr. Richard Montgomery had become the chief of medicine. Dr. Montgomery was a widower who had lost his wife to cancer years earlier. He had no children of his own, and over time, we developed a close professional relationship. He often told me I was the best nurse on staff, someone he could always count on. Then, during Michael's second year at the company, he met Jennifer Parker. She was beautiful, ambitious, and came from one of the wealthiest families in the neighboring town of Westfield. Her father Thomas owned a successful chain of car dealerships, and her mother Diana was known for her elaborate charity galas. From the start I could tell they operated in different circles than we did. "Mom, I want you to meet Jenny," Michael said when he brought her home for dinner the first time. "She's in marketing at work, and she's amazing." Jennifer was polite but distant that evening. She glanced around our modest living room with barely concealed judgment, her eyes lingering on the outdated furniture and the family photos on the wall. "Your home is quaint," she said, in a tone that made it clear she meant otherwise. "Michael tells me you've lived here your whole married life?" "Yes," I replied warmly, trying to bridge the gap I already felt forming. "Robert and I bought it when we were just starting out. It's nothing fancy, but it's filled with love." Jennifer smiled tightly. "Well, that's what matters, isn't it? Though Michael and I have been looking at some properties in Lakeview Estates. Have you seen those new developments? They're absolutely gorgeous." Lakeview Estates was the most expensive neighborhood in Oak Ridge. The houses there started at prices I couldn't even fathom. "That sounds lovely," I managed, catching Michael's eyes. He looked away quickly. When they announced their engagement, 6 months later, I was happy for Michael but concerned about the differences in backgrounds and expectations. Still, I embraced Jennifer and tried my best to be involved in the wedding planning. "Barbara," Diana Parker said during our first meeting to discuss the wedding, "we've already reserved the Westfield Country Club and hired the top wedding planner in the state. We'll handle all the arrangements. You don't need to worry about a thing." I felt sidelined but reminded myself that this was about Michael and Jennifer, not me. I offered to help with the rehearsal dinner. "Oh," Diana exchanged glances with Jennifer. "We've actually already booked the rehearsal dinner at Le Chateau. Thomas has connections with the owner." "I see," I said quietly. "Well, is there anything I can help with?" Jennifer patted my hand as if I were a child. "We know you want to contribute, Barbara. Maybe you could help with assembling the wedding favors?" I swallowed my pride and nodded. After all, wasn't it a mother's job to support her child's happiness even when it stung? The wedding was extravagant. 7 bridesmaids in designer gowns, ice sculptures at every table, and a band that had apparently once played for a minor celebrity. I felt out of place in my best dress, which suddenly seemed woefully inadequate among the Parkers' social circle. Michael spent most of the reception with Jennifer's family, stopping by my table only briefly. "Are you having a good time, Mom?" he asked, his tie slightly loosened after hours of dancing. "Of course, sweetheart. Everything is beautiful. I'm so happy for you." He smiled, relieved. "Jenny's dad is talking about bringing me into the business side of things at the company. Says I have potential beyond just programming." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it despite the nagging feeling that Michael was being pulled further into the Parkers' orbit and further from me. After the honeymoon, Michael and Jennifer started house hunting in earnest. They invited me along one weekend to see a house in Lakeview Estates, a sprawling colonial with 4 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a backyard that overlooked the lake. "Isn't it perfect, Mom?" Michael asked, his eyes bright with excitement. It was beautiful, but I couldn't help wondering how they could afford it. Michael had a good job, but he'd only been working for a few years, and I knew he still had student loans. "It's lovely," I said, "but sweetheart, are you sure it's within your budget?" Jennifer's smile tightened. "My parents are helping with the down payment as a wedding gift. We've run the numbers, and we can make it work. What I didn't know then was that making it work would soon involve me. About a month after they moved in, Michael called me, his voice strained. "Mom, I hate to ask, but we're in a bit of a bind. The property taxes here are higher than we expected, and with the new furniture and Jenny's car payment." "How much do you need?" I asked without hesitation. "5,000 would help us get caught up," he said, sounding relieved that I hadn't questioned him further. I withdrew the money from my savings the next day. It wasn't easy. I had been putting away a little each month for a small condo I hoped to buy eventually, something easier to maintain as I got older. But Michael needed me, and that's what mattered. This became a pattern over the next year. Every few months, Michael would call with another temporary financial emergency. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The air conditioning system needed replacing. Jennifer's company was downsizing, and she needed to invest in additional certifications. They had to replace the hardwood floors because Jennifer didn't like the color. Each time I dipped further into my savings. Each time Michael promised it was just until they got back on their feet. Each time, the thank you notes and calls became shorter and less frequent. Then came the biggest request of all. Michael showed up at my house one evening, alone. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with his homework, where we'd shared meals after Robert died, where we'd planned his future. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious," he began, fidgeting with his wedding ring. "Jennifer and we're struggling with the mortgage. The interest rate adjusted up, and with everything else." My heart sank. I already knew what was coming. "How much are you behind?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. 3 months. But it's not just that. The payment is just too high. For us right now. Jenny's father had some business setbacks, so they can't help anymore. I took a deep breath. "What are you asking, Michael? If you could help with the mortgage for a while, just until I get the promotion I'm up for, or until Jenny finds a better position. We don't want to lose the house, Mom. We've made it our home." Our home. The words echoed in my mind as I thought about the house that Robert and I had worked so hard for, the home where I'd raised Michael, which Michael had suggested I sell after his father died. Still, I agreed. I couldn't bear the thought of my son and his wife being forced out of their home, facing the embarrassment of foreclosure. "I'll need to talk to Dr. Montgomery about picking up more hours," I said. At 60, the overnight shifts were becoming harder on my body, but I would manage. Michael's relief was palpable. "You're the best, Mom. I promise we'll pay you back, once we're on solid ground again." That night, after he left, I sat alone in my kitchen and calculated what this would mean for me financially. The mortgage payment on their Lakeview home was nearly twice what I paid for my own house. To cover it, I would need to postpone my own retirement indefinitely and drastically cut back on my already modest expenses. But what choice did I have? He was my son, my only child, my last connection to Robert. The next day, I spoke with Dr. Montgomery about taking on additional responsibilities. "Barbara," he said, concern evident in his voice, "you're already working more hours than someone your age should. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I assured him. "I'm just trying to build up my retirement fund." He didn't look convinced, but he respected me too much to pry. "I can assign you to the cardiac care unit for some extra shifts. They're always short-staffed, but promise me you'll take care of yourself." I promised, though I knew it would be a promise hard to keep. For the next 3 years, I paid Michael and Jennifer's mortgage without complaint. Each month, I transferred the money directly to their account, often skipping lunch, in the hospital cafeteria to save a few dollars. I postponed needed repairs on my own home, let my car go without routine maintenance longer than I should have, and declined invitations from friends if they involved spending money. During this time, My relationship with Michael and Jennifer gradually shifted. The weekly Sunday dinners became monthly, then occasional. The phone calls grew shorter, the excuses more frequent. Jennifer rarely asked about my life anymore, and when I visited their home, I couldn't help but notice how they'd redecorated lavishly while I was pinching pennies to keep them afloat. "The new sectional is gorgeous," I commented during one visit, eyeing what must have been a very expensive piece of furniture. "It's from that designer showroom in the city," Jennifer said casually. "We decided we deserved to splurge a little. Mental health is important, you know." I bit my tongue, thinking of the leaky faucet in my bathroom I couldn't afford to fix. That same evening, I overheard Jennifer on the phone with her mother. "I know, Mom. It's exhausting having to include her in everything. But Michael feels obligated, you know? At least she helps out financially." My cheeks burned with humiliation. Helps out financially? I was paying their entire mortgage, sacrificing my own well-being to maintain their lifestyle, and this was how she characterized my contribution. But the real turning point came the week before Thanksgiving of last year. I had been battling a persistent cough for weeks, pushing through my shifts despite feeling increasingly fatigued. Dr. Montgomery noticed me leaning against the nurse's station one evening, trying to catch my breath. "That's it, Barbara," he said firmly. "I'm ordering a chest X-ray right now." The diagnosis came back the next day: pneumonia with complications due to exhaustion and a weakened immune system. "You need rest," Dr. Montgomery insisted. "Complete rest. I'm putting you on medical leave for at least 4 weeks. I protested, thinking of the mortgage payment due in 2 weeks, but he was adamant. "This isn't negotiable. Your health has to come first." For the first time in years, I had to think about my own needs. As I lay in my bed that evening, listening to the rain against my window, I made a decision. I would call Michael, explain the situation, and ask if they could handle their mortgage for a month or 2 while I recovered. When I phoned the next morning, Jennifer answered. "Barbara," she said, her voice cool. "Michael's in a meeting. Can I take a message?" "It's important, Jenny. I need to talk to him about the mortgage payment." There was a pause. "The mortgage payment? What about it?" "I'm on medical leave. Pneumonia. I won't be able to work. Extra shifts for a while, so I was hoping you and Michael could cover the mortgage until I'm back on my feet." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably. "Jenny? Did you hear me?" "I heard you," she said, her voice suddenly hard. "So you're saying you won't be sending the money this month?" The way she phrased it, like it was an obligation, not a sacrifice I'd been making, stung deeply. "I can't, Jenny. I'm ill, and the doctor says—" "We're counting on that money, Barbara," she cut in. "We have plans. We've already booked our ski trip in Vermont over Christmas break." I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. They had money for a ski vacation, but not for their own mortgage? "I've been covering your mortgage for 3 years, I said quietly. "I think you and Michael can manage for a month while I recover from pneumonia." Her laugh was short and dismissive. "Right, because that makes up for everything Michael did for you after his father died." "What?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "He told me how you leaned on him completely after Robert died. How he had to be your emotional support when he was barely 20. How he stayed local for college because you couldn't handle being alone." Each word felt like a slap. That wasn't what happened at all. I had held myself together for Michael's sake, worked extra shifts to keep him in college, encouraged him to follow his dreams. "That's not true, Jenny." "Look," she said with exaggerated patience, "we all know you've been helping with the mortgage because you wanted to be involved in our lives. And that's fine. But don't try to use your health as leverage now." I was speechless. In what universe was paying someone's mortgage considered wanting to be involved? "I'll talk to Michael tonight," I finally managed to say. "Please have him call me." But Michael didn't call that night. or the next. When he finally reached out 3 days later, he sounded rushed and defensive. "Mom, Jenny told me about your conversation. I'm sorry you're not feeling well, but we really need that payment. We've committed to hosting a pre-Christmas dinner for Jenny's work colleagues, and we've already ordered new dining room furniture." "Michael," I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest that had nothing to do with pneumonia. "I've been paying your mortgage for 3 years. 3 years of extra shifts, of skipping meals, of putting off repairs on my own home. I'm asking for a short break while I recover from a serious illness." There was silence on the other end, then, "So you're keeping track? I thought you were helping because you wanted to, not because you expected something in return." His words hit me like a physical blow. How had we gotten here? When had my son become someone who could speak to me this way? "I don't expect anything in return except basic respect," I said, my voice breaking, "and perhaps some concern for my health." "Of course I'm concerned," he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just bad timing. The holidays are coming up and we have obligations." "Obligations more important than your mother's health?" I asked. He sighed, the sound crackling through the phone. "Let's not make this dramatic, Mom. Look, I'll see what we can do. Maybe we can send you half this month." Half. After everything, he was offering half. "Don't bother," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "I'll figure something out." After we hung up, I sat in my silent house, truly seeing my situation for the first time. I had given everything to a son who viewed my sacrifices as obligations. I had emptied my savings to maintain his lifestyle while neglecting my own needs. I had worked myself into illness for people who planned ski vacations while I couldn't afford to fix my leaky faucet. Something fundamental had to change, and it had to start with me. The next day, despite still feeling weak, I made 2 important calls. The first was to my bank, to stop the automatic transfer to Michael and Jennifer's account. The second was to my old friend Grace Thompson, a retired teacher who had been trying to get me to join her volunteer group at the community center for years. "Barbara Wilson," she said warmly when she picked up. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" "I was wondering if that offer to join your book club is still open," I said, surprising myself with how light my voice sounded. "Always. We meet on Thursdays at the library. But aren't you usually working then?" "Not anymore," I said. "I'm making some changes." As I recovered from pneumonia over the next 2 weeks, I received multiple texts and calls from Michael, each more urgent than the last. Where was the mortgage? Payment? Had I forgotten to transfer the money? Was there a problem with the bank? I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on getting well and reconsidering my priorities. I started reading books that had been sitting on my shelf for years. I invited Grace over for tea. I even called my sister Linda in Ohio, whom I hadn't spoken to in months because I'd been too busy working extra shifts. The day before Thanksgiving, Michael finally showed up at my door. He looked harried, his normally neat hair uncombed, his eyes shadowed with stress. "Mom," he said as soon as I opened the door, "there's been some mistake with the mortgage payment. The bank says the transfer was canceled." I stepped aside to let him in, noticing how he barely glanced at me, didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't comment on my still evident weight loss from being ill. "It wasn't a mistake, Michael," I said calmly as we sat in my living room. "I canceled the transfer intentionally." He stared at me, uncomprehending. "What? Why would you do that?" "Because I'm no longer able to pay your mortgage. I'm focusing on my health and my future now." His face flushed with anger. "You can't. Just decide that without warning. We have commitments based on that money." "Like your ski trip?" I asked quietly. He had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before rallying. "That's not fair. We work hard, and we deserve a vacation. And I deserve to retire someday. I deserve to live without working myself into exhaustion. I deserve to be treated with respect by my son and daughter-in-law. Michael ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. This isn't like you, Mom. You've always been there for me. And I always will be, emotionally. But financially, you and Jennifer need to stand on your own 2 feet now. He stood up abruptly. Fine. We'll figure it out ourselves. But don't expect us to rearrange our lives to include you when you're being this selfish. Selfish? The word hung in the air between us. Thanksgiving is tomorrow, I said, changing the subject. Will I see you and Jennifer? He shook his head, not meeting my eyes. We're going to the Parkers. Jenny's mom is expecting us. I see. And Christmas? About that, he said, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality. Jenny's parents are hosting at their place this year. It's going to be mostly their crowd, their family friends. Jenny thinks. We both think. It might be awkward for you. And there it was. After everything I had sacrificed, after years of putting their needs before my own, I wasn't even welcome at their Christmas table. Awkward, I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. It's nothing personal, Michael said, already backing toward the door. It's just a different crowd, you know. You probably wouldn't enjoy it anyway. But it was personal. It was deeply, painfully personal. I understand, I said, though I didn't. Not really. I hope you have a lovely holiday. After he left, I stood in my doorway for a long time, watching the spot where his car had been parked. 34 years of motherhood, of putting him first, and this was where we had landed. A place where I was considered selfish for not working myself to death to pay for his lifestyle, where I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner because I didn't fit in with my own son's new life. That evening, I received a text from Jennifer. Michael told me about your decision. Very disappointed. Thought you cared about our family. Guess we know where we stand now. I didn't respond. Instead, I made another decision, one that would change everything. The next morning, rather than spending Thanksgiving alone feeling sorry for myself, I drove to the community center where Grace had organized a holiday meal for seniors who had nowhere else to go. I hadn't told her I was coming, and her face lit up when she saw me walk in. Barbara, I didn't expect to see you today. I had a change of plans, I said simply. She didn't pry, just handed me an apron. Well, we're glad to have you. The mashed potatoes need stirring. For the first time in years, I enjoyed a holiday meal without tension, without walking on eggshells, without carefully monitoring my words to avoid offending Jennifer or her parents. The seniors at the community center were grateful for the company, the food, and the simple kindness of being remembered on a holiday. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. And with that peace came clarity about what I needed to do next. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I made an appointment with the lawyer who had helped me with Robert's estate years ago. Martin Goldstein's office was exactly as I remembered it. Bookshelves lining the walls, the scent of coffee perpetually in the air, and a sense of calm competence that had comforted me during those dark days after losing my husband. Barbara, Martin said warmly, rising from behind his desk to greet me. It's been too long. How can I help you today? I settled into the chair across from him, smoothing my skirt nervously. I need some legal advice about a financial situation with my son. Martin nodded, his expression turning professional. Tell me what's going on. I explained everything. How I'd been paying Michael and Jennifer's mortgage for 3 years, the recent conflict over my illness, and their exclusion of me from the holidays. As I spoke, Martin took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, tapping his pen thoughtfully against his legal pad. Let me make sure I understand correctly. You've been making direct payments to their mortgage lender, but there's no formal loan agreement between you and your son. That's right. It was just a verbal understanding that they would pay me back someday, when they were more financially stable. And approximately how much have you paid toward their mortgage over these 3 years? I had calculated this number precisely the night before. $126,000. Martin's eyebrows shot up. That's a substantial sum, Barbara. And you mentioned you withdrew from your retirement savings to cover some of these payments? I nodded, feeling a flush of shame. I also picked up extra shifts at the hospital, but it wasn't enough. I've depleted almost all of my non-pension savings. I see. He leaned forward, his expression gentle but serious. From a legal standpoint, without a written agreement, this money could be considered a gift rather than a loan. However, we could argue that there was an implied contract based on the pattern of payments and the verbal understanding. What are my options? I asked. Well, you could sue for repayment, though that would be a lengthy and potentially expensive process, not to mention the strain it would put on your relationship with Michael. He paused. Or you could simply stop the payments, as you've already done, and let them handle the consequences. The thought of suing my own son made my stomach clench. I don't want to take legal action against Michael. I just want to protect what I have left for my own future. Martin nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then I recommend documenting everything. Every payment you've made, any text messages or emails discussing these payments, and the circumstances surrounding them. Keep this documentation in case they try to make any claims against you in the future. Do you think they would do that? I hope not, but in my experience, money can bring out the worst in people, even family. He hesitated, then added, There's one more thing to consider, Barbara. If they default on their mortgage and the property goes into foreclosure, it could affect you if your name is on any of the loan documents. My heart skipped a beat. My name isn't on their mortgage, but I did co-sign on a home equity line of credit they took out last year. Jennifer said they needed it for home improvements. Martin's expression grew concerned. In that case, if they default on that loan, the lender could come after you for payment. How much was the line of credit? $50,000, I said quietly. He sighed. I strongly recommend you check the status of that account immediately. If they've drawn on that credit line, you may want to consider paying it off directly to protect your own credit and financial security. I left Martin's office with a clear action plan, but a heavy heart. The reality of my financial vulnerability was sobering. I had spent years giving everything to my son, and now I needed to focus on protecting myself from further damage. My first stop was the bank where Michael and Jennifer had opened the home equity line of credit. After verifying my identity as a co-signer, the bank representative pulled up the account information. The current balance on the HELOC is $48,622, she said, turning the screen slightly so I could see. My mouth went dry. They had used almost the entire credit line. When was the last transaction? I asked. The representative clicked through a few screens. There was a withdrawal of $12,000 on November 15th. Just before Thanksgiving. Just before they booked their ski vacation and told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas. I'd like to pay off this balance and close the account, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The representative looked surprised. The entire balance? That's a significant amount. I understand. I'll be transferring the funds from my retirement account. It took nearly 2 hours to complete all the paperwork, including the early withdrawal from my retirement fund. The penalties were substantial, but Martin had made it clear that the alternative, remaining financially entangled with Michael and Jennifer, could be far more costly in the long run. As I drove home, a strange calm settled over me. I had just sacrificed almost all of my remaining retirement savings to protect myself from my own son's financial decisions. The pain of that reality was so profound it had circled around to numbness. At home, I found 3 missed calls from Michael and a text message that read, Need to discuss mortgage situation ASAP. Call me. I set my phone aside without responding. I needed time to process everything before engaging with him again. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notepad, taking stock of my financial situation. After paying off the HELOC, I had approximately $20,000 left in accessible savings, barely enough for a year of minimal expenses if I stopped working entirely. My pension from the hospital would start at 65, providing a modest but dependable income. The equity in my house was substantial, but I had hoped to leave that to Michael someday. The irony wasn't lost on me. All these years, I had been saving for a future where I could help my son even after I was gone. Now I was facing the possibility of selling my home just to support myself in retirement. My phone rang again. Michael. This time I answered. "Mom?" "Finally," he said, sounding irritated. "I've been trying to reach you all day." "I had appointments," I replied simply. "Well, we need to talk about this mortgage situation. The payment was due yesterday, and we got a late notice from the bank." "Yes, I imagine you did." There was a pause, as if he was taken aback by my calm tone. "So, are you going to send the payment or not? Because if this goes on our credit report—" "I won't be making any more payments on your mortgage, Michael," I interrupted. "As I told you last week, I'm focusing on my own financial security now." "Mom, you can't just—" He stopped. Then his voice took on a wheedling tone I recognized from his teenage years when he wanted something expensive. "Look, I know you're upset about Christmas, but that's Jenny's family's tradition. It's not like we're excluding you deliberately." "Except that is exactly what you're doing," I said quietly. "Jenny specifically told me I wouldn't fit in with the crowd at her parents' house." "She didn't mean it like that," he protested. "It's just that her family does things differently. They're more formal." "More formal than the woman who raised you, who worked 60-hour weeks to put you through college, who has been paying your mortgage for 3 years. That woman isn't formal enough to sit at a Christmas table with your wife's family?" The silence on the other end told me he had no good answer. "Michael," I continued, my voice softening, "I love you. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. But this relationship has become unhealthy. You and Jennifer need to take responsibility for your own finances, and I need to prepare for my retirement." "But the mortgage is your responsibility, not mine. I've already made sacrifices you don't even know about to protect myself financially. I paid off the home equity line of credit today." "You what?" His voice rose in pitch. "Why would you do that?" "Because I was a cosigner, and I couldn't risk my credit being damaged if you and Jennifer defaulted." "We weren't going to default. We just needed some flexibility until after the holidays." I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. "Michael, you withdrew $12,000 from that credit line 2 weeks ago. Was that for your ski vacation? Or the new dining room furniture?" He didn't respond immediately, and when he did, his voice was defensive. "We needed that furniture for entertaining. Jenny's boss is coming for dinner next month. It's important for her career." "More important than your mother's financial security? More important than treating me with basic respect?" "That's not fair," he snapped. "You're twisting everything. We appreciate what you've done, but you can't hold it over our heads forever." The phrase "what you've done" struck me as so inadequate to describe the years of sacrifice, the depletion of my savings, the toll on my health. It wasn't what I'd done. It was what I'd given, at great personal cost. "I'm not holding anything over your head," I said. "I'm simply stating facts. I've supported you financially well into your adulthood, and now I'm stepping back. How you handle your finances going forward is up to you." "So that's it? You're just cutting us off?" "I'm prioritizing my own needs after decades of prioritizing yours. It's called setting boundaries, Michael." The conversation ended shortly after, with Michael still upset but seemingly beginning to realize I wouldn't be swayed. I sat in my kitchen for a long time afterward, staring at the wall calendar where I'd circled Christmas Day with a red marker months ago, anticipating spending it with my son and his wife. The next morning, I received a text from Jennifer. Michael told me what you did. Paying off the HELOC without discussing it with us first was manipulative and controlling. We had plans for that money. This is exactly why we need space from you right now. I read the message twice, marveling at the mental gymnastics required to frame my paying off a debt I was legally responsible for as manipulative. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to the hospital to speak with Dr. Montgomery about my return to work. The pneumonia had improved significantly, but I still tired easily and knew I couldn't handle the overnight shifts I'd been working to cover Michael's mortgage. Dr. Montgomery welcomed me into his office, concern evident in his eyes. "Barbara, you're looking better, but not fully recovered. Are you sure you're ready to come back?" "Not to my previous schedule," I admitted. "I was hoping we could discuss options for reduced hours." He nodded thoughtfully. "We could move. You do administrative work for a while, 3 days a week, regular daytime hours. The pay would be less, but—" "That sounds perfect," I interrupted. "I've been reassessing my finances, and I've decided it's time to start my transition toward retirement." "May I speak frankly?" he asked, leaning forward in his chair. "Of course. I've been concerned about you for some time, Barbara. The hours you've been working aren't sustainable for someone your age, regardless of how dedicated you are. And," he hesitated, "I've observed that your son rarely visits you here, even when you've worked holidays or overnight shifts." I felt a flush of embarrassment. Was my situation so obvious to others? "Michael has his own life," I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. Dr. Montgomery's gaze was gentle but penetrating. "We've worked together for 15 years now? In all that time, I've never seen someone give so much and ask for so little in return." I didn't know how to respond, uncomfortable with both the praise and the implicit criticism of my son. "The administrative position starts next week if you're interested," he continued, changing the subject. "Take the rest of this week to rest and recover fully." I thanked him and was about to leave when he added, "Oh, and Barbara, the hospital's annual Christmas party is on the 23rd. I hope you'll join us this year, since I recall you usually work that evening." The kindness in his invitation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I'd like that," I managed to say before leaving his office. The next 2 weeks passed in relative calm. I adjusted to my new schedule at the hospital, finding the administrative work less physically taxing but intellectually engaging. I started attending Grace's book club at the library and even volunteered at the community center one weekend, helping to organize a clothing drive. Michael called twice more about the mortgage, each conversation becoming increasingly tense. The reality of their financial situation was setting in, and neither he nor Jennifer seemed prepared to make the necessary lifestyle adjustments. "We might have to sell the house," he said during our last call, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. "That might be the most sensible option," I replied calmly. "You could find something more within your means." "This is our home," he protested. "We've put so much into it. And what would Jenny's family think?" I bit back the observation that their concern with appearances had contributed significantly to their current predicament. "Michael, there are worse things than downsizing to a home you can actually afford." "Easy for you to say," he muttered. "You've lived in the same house for 30 years. "Yes, a house your father and I could afford on our combined salaries, with careful budgeting and modest expectations." The conversation ended with him declaring, "We'll figure it out ourselves," as if that hadn't been exactly what I was suggesting all along. I didn't hear from either of them for several days after that, which gave me time to focus on my own healing, both physical and emotional. The distance helped me see the pattern of our relationship more clearly. For years, I had been enabling Michael and Jennifer's financial irresponsibility, all while being slowly edged out of their lives except when they needed money. Then, a week before Christmas, the doorbell rang. It was early evening, and I hadn't been expecting visitors. When I opened the door, I was surprised to find Thomas Parker, Jennifer's father, standing on my porch. "Mr. Parker," I said, unable to hide my confusion. In all the years Michael had been married to Jennifer, Thomas had barely spoken more than a few sentences to me. "Mrs. Wilson," he nodded stiffly. "May I come in? There's a matter we need to discuss." I stepped aside to let him enter, noting the expensive cashmere coat and leather gloves he removed as he stepped into my modest living room. "Can I offer you some tea or coffee?" I asked, falling back on basic hospitality despite my wariness. "No, thank you. This won't take long." He remained standing, eyeing my furniture with the same barely concealed judgment his daughter had shown during her first visit years ago. "What can I do for you, Mr. Parker?" He clasped his hands behind his back, adopting a posture reminiscent of a principal about to discipline a student. "I understand you've decided to withdraw your financial support from Michael and Jennifer's household." The way he phrased it made it sound like I was abandoning dependence rather than expecting grown adults to pay their own bills. "I've decided to focus on my own financial security," I corrected gently. "Michael and Jennifer are both employed adults fully capable of managing their own finances." Thomas's mouth tightened. "Be that as it may, your decision has created significant hardship for them. The timing is particularly unfortunate, with the holidays approaching and various social obligations to fulfill." I waited, sensing he was working his way to his actual point. "Jennifer is quite distressed," he continued. "She tells me you've not only stopped contributing to their mortgage, but also paid off and closed a line of credit they were relying on. A line of credit for which I was legally responsible as a cosigner," I pointed out. "I was protecting myself from potential liability." He waved a dismissive hand. "Legally, perhaps you were within your rights. But surely you understand the position this puts them in socially. They've committed to hosting events, made plans based on certain financial expectations. Expectations that I would continue to work 60-hour weeks at age 62 to fund their lifestyle?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the indignation rising within me. Thomas had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "No one expected you to work yourself ill, Mrs. Wilson. But a more gradual transition, with proper notice, would have been the considerate approach." "I gave notice when I was diagnosed with pneumonia," I said. "I explained that I couldn't maintain the extra shifts necessary to cover their mortgage. Michael and Jennifer chose to prioritize a ski vacation and new furniture over their own housing security." He frowned. "That's Jennifer's version." "It's the truth," I interrupted, surprising both of us with my firmness. "I have the bank statements and text messages to prove it." Thomas shifted his weight, clearly unused to being challenged. "Regardless of the details, the situation is causing considerable stress to my daughter and, by extension, my wife and myself. We're hosting Christmas at our home, with several prominent families attending. The last thing we need is for Michael and Jennifer to be distracted by financial worries." And there it was, the real concern. Not my son and daughter-in-law's financial stability, but how their stress might affect the Parkers' holiday entertainment. "What exactly are you asking of me, Mr. Parker?" I said, though I already knew the answer. "I'm suggesting a compromise," he said, his tone becoming more businesslike. "If you could resume the mortgage payments temporarily, just until after the new year, it would give them time to make arrangements. Perhaps downsize, as you suggested to Michael." "And why would I do that when I've already made it clear I need to prioritize my own financial security?" Thomas reached inside his coat and withdrew a checkbook. "I'm prepared to offer you compensation for this inconvenience." The implied insult that my financial decisions were merely an inconvenience to their social calendar was breathtaking in its callousness. "You want to pay me to resume paying my son's mortgage?" I clarified, wanting to be absolutely certain I understood this stunning proposition. "Think of it as a consulting fee," he said smoothly, uncapping an expensive-looking pen. "You temporarily resume the payments, allowing them to maintain appearances through the holiday season, and I compensate you for your trouble. Simple business arrangement." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. This man, this wealthy, privileged man who had never once invited me to his home despite years of family connection, was standing in my living room offering to essentially bribe me to continue enabling my son's financial dependence. "Mr. Parker?" I said finally, my voice quiet, but firm. "I'm not interested in being paid to support my own son. If you're concerned about Michael and Jennifer's financial situation, perhaps you should offer to help them directly." He looked genuinely surprised, as if the concept of directly supporting his own daughter had never occurred to him. "That's not how we do things in our family. We believe in financial independence." The irony was so rich I almost laughed. Financial independence facilitated by a 62-year-old nurse working overtime to pay bills for two healthy adults in their 30s? His face hardened. "I see Jennifer was right about your attitude. This is precisely why we felt it would be awkward to include you in our Christmas gathering. Because I expect adults to pay their own bills. Because you clearly harbor resentment toward my daughter and her lifestyle choices." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper would accomplish nothing. "Mr. Parker, I don't resent Jennifer or her choices. I simply can no longer subsidize them at the expense of my own health and financial security." He replaced his checkbook in his pocket with a sharp motion. "Very well. I can see this conversation isn't going to be productive. I'll tell Michael. And Jennifer, they'll need to make other arrangements." "That would be best," I agreed. As he moved toward the door, he paused, turning back with a calculating expression. "You know Barbara? May I call you Barbara? Many parents would be grateful that their child had married into a family of our standing. The connections alone are invaluable." I met his gaze steadily. "Many parents would expect their daughter-in-law's family to treat them with basic courtesy and respect, regardless of standing." His lips thinned, but he offered no response as he donned his coat and gloves. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Parker," I said as I opened the door for him. He nodded stiffly and left without returning. The sentiment. After closing the door, I leaned against it, my heart racing as if I'd run a marathon. The entire interaction had been surreal, from Thomas Parker's unexpected appearance on my doorstep to his brazen attempt to buy my continued financial support of Michael and Jennifer. More disturbing was the realization that this was how they all viewed me, as a resource to be utilized, an inconvenience when I failed to fulfill my designated role, a social embarrassment to be managed and excluded. Not as a person with my own needs, feelings, and dignity. I moved to my kitchen and put the kettle on, needing the comfort of a hot cup of tea. As I waited for the water to boil, I glanced at the calendar again, at that circled Christmas day, that now loomed as a day of solitude rather than family connection. For a moment, I felt a wave of doubt. Had I done the right thing? Should I have found a way to compromise, to ease Michael and Jennifer into financial independence more gradually? Was I punishing them for excluding me from Christmas by withdrawing financial support? The kettle whistled, interrupting my spiral of self-doubt. As I prepared my tea, I reminded myself of the facts. I had worked myself into pneumonia trying to support my son's lifestyle. I had depleted my savings and put my own retirement at risk. I had been explicitly told I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner because I wouldn't fit in with the Parkers' social circle. No, I wasn't punishing Michael and Jennifer. I was finally recognizing that I deserved better treatment than I had been receiving. I was establishing boundaries that should have been in place years ago. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed Michael's number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mom?" He began without preamble, his voice tight with anger. "Did you just refuse money from Thomas Parker?" So Thomas had wasted no time reporting our conversation. "I refused to be paid to resume paying your mortgage, yes." "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for us? For Jenny's father to have to come to you like that?" I closed my eyes, absorbing the fact that my son saw his father-in-law attempting to bribe me as somehow humiliating for them, not for me. "Michael," I said quietly, "if you're embarrassed, it should be by the fact that your father-in-law felt he needed to intervene in your financial affairs, not by my refusal to accept payment for continuing to support you." "He was trying to help," Michael protested, "and you threw it back in his face. Do you have any idea what that's going to do to Jenny's relationship with her parents? They're furious. They're furious that I won't continue to work myself ill." "To pay your bills?" I clarified. "That seems like misplaced anger, don't you think?" "This isn't just about money anymore," he said, his voice shaking. "This is about you deliberately trying to ruin our holidays, our standing with Jenny's family, everything." The accusation stung, all the more because I could hear in his voice that he genuinely believed it. In his mind, my decision to prioritize my own well-being was a deliberate attack on him and Jennifer. "Michael, I love you," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I think you need to take a step back and consider how you would feel if our situations were reversed. If I expected you to work extra hours to pay my bills, then excluded you from family gatherings because you wouldn't fit in." "That's different," he muttered. "Parents are supposed to help their children." "Adult children are supposed to become independent," I countered gently, "and to treat their parents with respect and gratitude, not as ATMs they can access whenever they want." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, with a coldness I'd never heard from him before, Michael said, "You know what? Fine. Keep your money. Stay home alone for Christmas. I hope it's worth it." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat at my kitchen table, the tea cooling in front of me, and let the tears come. Not just for the immediate pain of Michael's anger and rejection, but for all the years I'd spent believing that my sacrifices would someday be recognized and appreciated. For the gradual erosion of our relationship as Michael and Jennifer became more focused on appearances and status than on genuine connection. For the mother I'd been, who had failed to teach her son the value of gratitude and respect. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes but a clearer mind. I couldn't control Michael and Jennifer's reactions or choices. I could only control my own. I called Grace and asked if the offer to join her family for Christmas dinner was still open. "Of course," she exclaimed. "We'd love to have you. And don't worry about bringing anything fancy, just your wonderful self." Then I called Dr. Montgomery's office to confirm I would attend the hospital Christmas party on the 23rd. His secretary sounded pleased. "Dr. Montgomery will be delighted. He specifically asked me to make sure you were coming." Finally, I called my sister Linda in Ohio. We hadn't been close in recent years, partly due to distance and partly due to the time constraints of my work schedule. "Barbara," she said warmly when she answered. "What a lovely surprise." We talked for nearly an hour, catching up on each other's lives. When I told her in broad strokes about the situation with Michael and Jennifer, she was supportive without being judgmental. "It sounds like you're finally taking care of yourself," she said. "It's about time, if you ask me. You've always been the one to give until there's nothing left." "I just never thought it would come to this," I admitted. Being excluded from Christmas, having my son angry at me for not paying his bills. "Sometimes the hardest part of being a parent is letting our children face the consequences of their own choices," Linda said wisely. "You taught Michael how to walk by eventually letting go of his hands, right? This is just the adult version of that." Her perspective was comforting. A reminder that stepping back wasn't abandonment, but rather a necessary part of parenting an adult child. You know, Linda added before we hung up, I was planning to visit Aunt Martha in Pittsburgh. After New Year's, that's not too far from you. Maybe I could extend my trip and spend a few days with you? The prospect of seeing my sister, of reconnecting with family who valued my company, lifted my spirits considerably. I'd love that, I said sincerely. After hanging up, I sat quietly in my living room, thinking about the changes I'd made and those still to come. For the first time in years, I wasn't arranging my life around Michael's needs and preferences. I was making plans based on my own wishes, connecting with people who reciprocated my affection, setting boundaries that protected my well-being. It wasn't the life I had envisioned when Michael was growing up, when I imagined us always being close, always being central to each other's lives. But it was a life I could embrace with dignity and self-respect. The path forward wouldn't be easy. There would be more difficult conversations, more accusations, more painful realizations about how much my relationship with my son had changed. But I was no longer willing to purchase his presence in my life at the cost of my own health and financial security. As I looked at that circled Christmas Day on my calendar, I decided to erase the red circle and write instead, Dinner at Grace's, 2 p.m. Not the family holiday I had planned, but perhaps the beginning of a new tradition, one built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not obligation and financial dependence. And that, I realized with a sense of bittersweet peace, would have to be enough. The hospital Christmas party was more elegant than I had expected. The administration had transformed the usually sterile conference room into a winter wonderland, with twinkling lights, silver and blue decorations, and tables adorned with centerpieces of white roses and pine branches. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and servers circulated with trays of appetizers and champagne. I had debated what to wear, eventually settling on a simple navy dress I'd purchased years ago for a fundraiser Robert and I had attended. It still fit well enough, though I'd added a silver scarf to update it and hide the slightly dated neckline. As I stood somewhat awkwardly near the entrance, Dr. Montgomery spotted me and made his way through the crowd. "Barbara," he said warmly. "You look lovely. I'm so glad you could make it." "Thank you, Richard," I replied, using his first name as he'd often asked me to do outside of work hours. "Everything looks beautiful." He offered me his arm. "Let me introduce you to some people. Most of the administrative staff only know you. By reputation." I raised an eyebrow. "Reputation?" He smiled. "As the most competent nurse in the cardiac unit, and the only person who can decipher my handwriting." For the next hour, Richard guided me through the party, introducing me to board members, administrative personnel, and physicians from other departments. To my surprise, many of them greeted me by name, mentioning specific instances where my work had impressed them or helped their patients. "Dr. Patel still talks about how you recognized the signs of a rare complication in that transplant patient last year," the chief of surgery told me. "Said it probably saved the patient's life." I blushed, unaccustomed to such direct praise. I was just doing my job. "With exceptional skill," Richard added firmly. As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing, even enjoying the respite from my personal concerns. Richard was an attentive companion, making sure my glass was refilled and finding us a table when dinner was served. "You seem different tonight," he observed as we enjoyed our meal. "Different how?" He considered for a moment. "More present, somehow. Usually when I see you at work functions, you seem distracted, as if you're mentally calculating how soon you can politely leave to get back to your responsibilities." I couldn't deny the accuracy of his observation. For years, I had treated hospital events as obligations to be endured rather than enjoyed, always aware of the ticking clock of my commitments to Michael. "I suppose I am more present," I acknowledged. "I've made some changes recently, trying to focus more on myself." "It suits you," he said simply. After dessert was served, The hospital CEO gave a brief speech, thanking everyone for their dedication throughout the year. As he concluded, he announced that there would be small gifts for each attendee, arranged alphabetically on tables near the exit. When the formal portion of the evening ended, Richard and I made our way to the gift table. The package with my name was elegantly wrapped in silver paper with a blue ribbon. "Open it," Richard encouraged. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover, along with a gift card to a local spa. "This is for everyone?" I asked, surprised by the personal touch. Richard smiled slightly. "The spa gift cards are standard. The journals were my idea, but I may have taken special care with yours." I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the champagne I'd been sipping. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful. I remember you once mentioned that you used to keep a journal before life got too busy. I thought perhaps now might be a good time to resume the practice." The fact that he had remembered such a casual comment, made years ago during a quiet night shift, touched me deeply. As the party wound down, Richard offered to walk me to my car. The December night was cold but clear, with stars visible despite the city lights. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said as we crossed the parking lot. "There's a chamber music concert at the university next weekend. Would you be interested in attending? With me, I mean." I stopped walking, taken by surprise. "Are you asking me on a date, Richard?" He looked slightly embarrassed but met my eyes directly. "I suppose I am. Is that inappropriate? I know we've worked together for many years, but—" "It's not inappropriate," I interrupted gently. "It's just unexpected." "I've always admired you, Barbara. Your competence, your compassion, your quiet strength. I should have asked you years ago, but you always seemed so unavailable. Not just in terms of time, but emotionally as well." I thought about how I had structured my entire life around Michael's needs and wants, leaving little room for personal connections or relationships. How many opportunities for friendship, for companionship, for joy had I missed in those years of single-minded devotion? "The concert sounds lovely," I said. "I'd be happy to join you." His smile lit up his face, making him appear years younger. "Wonderful. I'll pick you up at 7 if that works." We confirmed the details, and as he opened my car door for me, he hesitated, then leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on my cheek. "Merry Christmas, Barbara," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Richard." As I drove home, my cheek still tingling from the unexpected kiss, I felt a sensation I hadn't experienced in years, the fluttering excitement of possibility. At 62, I had assumed that the romantic chapter of my life was closed, that my role had narrowed to mother, nurse, caregiver. The idea that I might still have experiences ahead of me, concerts, dates, connections, was both thrilling and slightly terrifying. When I arrived home, I noticed lights on in my neighbor's house. Across the street, Ellen Walsh had lived there for as long as I had been in my home, but our interactions had been limited to waves and occasional brief chats about the weather or neighborhood happenings. Like so many of my potential friendships, I had never cultivated a deeper connection, always rushing back to my responsibilities. On impulse, I crossed the street and knocked on her door. Ellen answered, surprise evident on her face. "Barbara, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I assured her. "I was just wondering, the Christmas lights on your house look so beautiful every year. I've always meant to ask if you'd help me put some up on mine. If you have time, of course." Ellen's face lit up. "I'd love to. Frank always handled our exterior decorations, but after he passed, I taught myself. It's become a bit of a passion now." She glanced at her watch. "It's not too late if you want to at least make a plan tonight. I have hot chocolate." An hour later, Ellen and I sat at her kitchen table with empty mugs and a sketch of how we would decorate my house the following weekend. What had started as a conversation about Christmas lights had evolved into shared stories about our late husbands, our experiences in the neighborhood, and our common interest in gardening. "We should start a small garden club when spring comes," Ellen suggested enthusiastically. "There are at least 4 other neighbors I know who would join." "I'd like that," I said, realizing I meant it. "I've been thinking about redoing my backyard for years, but never seemed to find the time." Ellen nodded understandingly. "Life has a way of slipping past while we're busy with other things. After Frank died, I spent 2 years just going through the motions. Then one day I looked around and thought, this isn't living, this is just existing. That's when I started saying yes to things. The community choir, the library volunteer program, even online dating, though that was a disaster." She laughed, shaking her head at the memory. "Online dating?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "Oh, yes. Terrible experiences mostly, but a few nice dinners with interesting men. No real connections, but it got me out of the house." She studied me curiously. "You've never thought about dating again?" I shook my head. Between work and family, obligations, it never seemed like an option. But actually, I just agreed to go to a concert next weekend. With a colleague, a male colleague. Ellen clapped her hands delightedly. "Barbara Wilson, is this a date?" "I think it might be," I admitted, feeling myself blush. "Well, you must. Tell me all about it afterward. And if you need to borrow any accessories or want a second opinion on your outfit, I'm right across the street." As I walked back to my house later, I was struck by how easily a simple neighborly interaction had blossomed into what felt like the beginning of a genuine friendship. All because I had made the effort to reach out, to say yes instead of hurrying, back to an empty house to worry about Michael's problems. The next morning, I woke feeling lighter than I had in months, perhaps years. I made coffee and took it to my back porch, despite the December chill, watching the winter birds at the feeder I maintained. The simple pleasure of the moment, the warm mug in my hands, the flitting chickadees, the pale winter sunshine, filled me with a contentment that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval or happiness. My phone chimed with a text message from Grace, confirming details for Christmas. Dinner at her home. I responded gratefully, then set the phone aside, determined not to let potential messages from Michael or Jennifer intrude on my peaceful morning. Later that day, I visited a local nursery to purchase a small living Christmas tree for my front window. In past years, I had either gone to Michael and Jennifer's for the holiday or not bothered with decorations at all if I was working. This year would be different. As I was paying for the tree, a familiar voice called my name. I turned to find David Chen, Michael's childhood friend, approaching with a warm smile. "Mrs. Wilson, it's been ages." He enveloped me in a friendly hug. "How are you?" "David, what a lovely surprise. I'm well, thank you. And you? Michael mentioned you're working for a software company now?" "That's right. I'm back visiting my parents for the holidays." He glanced at my purchase. "Getting into the Christmas spirit?" "Trying to," I said with a smile. "Are you still in touch with Michael?" A slight shadow crossed David's open, friendly face. "Not as much as I'd like. We grab lunch occasionally when I'm in town, but—" He hesitated. "But?" I prompted, gently. David shifted uncomfortably. "To be honest, Mrs. Wilson, things changed after he married Jennifer. Our friendship just isn't the same. I've tried to maintain the connection, but it's difficult when—" "When what, David?" I asked when he trailed off again. He sighed. "When it feels like your value is measured by what you can do for them socially or professionally." "I'm not in the same social circles as Jennifer's friends, and I work for a smaller company that can't offer Michael the networking opportunities he seems focused on these days." I nodded, a familiar ache in my chest. "I understand that feeling all too well." David's expression was sympathetic. "I heard you won't be joining them for Christmas this year." "News travels fast," I observed. wondering what version of the story Michael had shared. Michael mentioned it when I texted about getting together while I'm home. He said something about you having other plans this year. David paused, then added quietly. He also mentioned you've stopped helping them financially. I felt a flicker of anger that Michael was discussing our private financial matters with friends, but I kept my response neutral. Yes, I've needed to refocus on my own financial security. Good for you, David said with unexpected conviction. Michael was my best friend growing up, and I'll always care about him, but... He took a deep breath. But the way he and Jennifer live, always stretching beyond their means, always chasing the next status symbol. It's not sustainable. And it's changed him. The validation from someone who had known Michael since childhood was both comforting and painful. I keep hoping he'll realize that before it's too late, I said softly. Me too. David helped me carry the tree to my car. If you need any help setting this up, I'd be happy to stop by. My mom has your address. That's very kind of you, I said, touched by the offer. I should be able to manage, but I appreciate the thought. As we said goodbye, David surprised me with another hug. You know, Mrs. Wilson, Michael was always lucky to have you as his mom. Some of us could see that, even if he's forgotten it. Temporarily. I drove home with the tree, David's words echoing in my mind. It was a powerful reminder that not everyone in Michael's life viewed me through the same lens that he and Jennifer currently did. As an ATM, an obligation, an embarrassment. There were still people who recognized the value of the love and support I had provided all those years. With Ellen's help the following day, I decorated my house for the first time in years. Nothing extravagant, white lights outlining the roof, and windows, a wreath on the door, the small living tree visible through the front window. But it transformed the place, making it feel festive and welcoming. We should have cocoa to celebrate, Ellen declared when we finished. And you must tell me more about this doctor who's taking you to the concert. I laughed, feeling a girlish excitement that seemed decades younger than my actual age. There's not much to tell yet. Richard is the chief of medicine at St. Mary's. We've worked together for years. And he's only now asking you out? Men can be so slow, Ellen teased. Is he handsome? He's distinguished, I said thoughtfully. He has kind eyes and a good smile. He's widowed, no children. A doctor with no children and kind eyes. Sounds promising. Ellen wiggled her eyebrows suggestively, making me laugh again. I haven't been on a date since before I met Robert, I confessed. I'm not even sure I remember how to behave. Just be yourself, Ellen advised, patting my hand. That's always the best approach. And remember, he's probably just as nervous as you are. The day of the concert arrived, and I found myself spending an unusual amount of time on my appearance. I tried on 3 different outfits before settling on a deep burgundy dress I had purchased years ago but never worn, tucked away for a special occasion that never seemed to materialize. I styled my hair more carefully than usual and even applied makeup, a practice I had largely abandoned except for the most formal occasions. When Richard arrived precisely at 7, his appreciative gaze told me the effort had been worthwhile. You look beautiful, Barbara, he said warmly. Thank you. You're quite handsome yourself. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly, with a tie that complemented my dress so well it might have been coordinated. The concert was held in the university's small recital hall, an intimate venue with excellent acoustics. The program featured a string quartet performing Schubert and Dvorak, music that filled the space with emotional richness. As the musicians played, I found myself fully immersed in the experience, not thinking about Michael or Jennifer or financial concerns, just present in the beauty of the moment. During intermission, Richard and I strolled in the university's art gallery adjacent to the recital hall. Are you enjoying the performance? He asked. Very much, I replied sincerely. It's been too long since I attended a live concert. I confess I had ulterior motives in inviting you, Richard said with a smile. This quartet is performing a series of chamber music concerts throughout the year, and I was hoping to find someone who might want to attend them all with me. The implication that he was interested in more than just this evening, that he saw potential for an ongoing connection, sent a pleasant warmth through me. I might be persuaded, I said, returning his smile. After the concert concluded, Richard suggested dinner at a small Italian restaurant nearby. Over pasta and wine, our conversation flowed easily, moving from music to books, from hospital politics to travel dreams. I've always wanted to see the Greek islands, I admitted when he asked about places I hoped to visit. Robert and I planned to go for our 30th anniversary, but then he got sick. Richard nodded understandingly. Emily and I had similar plans for Ireland. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to go alone. But lately, I've been thinking, perhaps it's time. What changed? I asked. He considered the question thoughtfully. I realized that by not going, I wasn't honoring her memory. I was freezing it in place, defining myself solely as a widower rather than as someone still capable of experiencing joy and discovery. He looked at me directly. What about you? Barbara? What's changed recently? You mentioned at the Christmas party that you've been making some shifts in your life. I hesitated, unsure how much to share on a first date. But there was something about Richard's open, non-judgmental expression that invited honesty. I've been reassessing my priorities, I said carefully. For many years, I centered my life around my son's needs and wants, often at the expense of my own well-being. Recently, I've had to acknowledge that this approach wasn't healthy for either of us. Richard nodded encouragingly, but didn't press for details, allowing me to share only what I felt comfortable revealing. I worked myself into pneumonia, trying to maintain a schedule that let me financially support my son and his wife, I continued. When I got sick and asked for a temporary reprieve, their response made me realize that the relationship had become unbalanced and unhealthy. That must have been painful, Richard said quietly. It was. It still is. I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. The hardest part has been accepting that the closeness I thought we had was conditional, dependent on my continued financial support. When I set boundaries, when I prioritized my own needs, everything changed. Setting boundaries with adult children can be incredibly difficult, Richard observed, especially when you've been in caretaking mode for so long. Does it make me a bad mother? The question slipped out before I could stop it, revealing an insecurity I hadn't intended to express. Richard's response was immediate and firm. Absolutely not. In fact, I'd argue it makes you a good mother, one who's modeling healthy self-care and appropriate boundaries for your son, even if he can't appreciate that lesson right now. His validation, offered without platitudes or dismissiveness, eased something tight in my chest. The rest of dinner passed pleasantly, with the conversation moving to lighter topics. Richard shared amusing hospital stories I'd never heard, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. When he drove me home later, he walked me to my door like a perfect gentleman. I had a wonderful time, Barbara, he said, standing close enough that I could smell his subtle cologne. So did I replied, suddenly feeling like a much younger woman on the doorstep after a successful first date. I'd very much like to see you again, he said. Perhaps dinner next weekend? Unless that's too soon. Not too soon at all, I assured him. He smiled, then leaned in slowly, giving me plenty of time to step back if I wished. Instead, I moved slightly closer, and our lips met in a gentle, brief kiss that nevertheless sent a shiver of pleasure through me. Good night, Barbara, he said softly. Good night, Richard. I entered my house feeling both giddy and slightly disoriented, as if I had stepped into someone else's life. Someone whose evenings included classical concerts, intimate dinners, and goodnight kisses from distinguished doctors. But as I moved through my familiar rooms, now softly illuminated by the Christmas lights Ellen had helped me hang, I realized this wasn't someone else's life. It was mine, finally expanding beyond the narrow confines I had accepted for so long. I was still, smiling the next morning when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jennifer's number, which was unusual enough to give me pause. In our years of knowing each other, Jennifer had rarely called me directly, preferring to leave communication with me to Michael. Curiosity won out, and I answered. "Hello, Jennifer." "Barbara." Her voice was taut with controlled emotion. "I think we need to talk." "All right," I said cautiously. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone," she said quickly. "Could we meet for coffee? Today, if possible." The request was so unexpected that I momentarily wondered if it was some kind of trap or manipulation, but Jennifer sounded genuinely distressed, not calculating. "I could meet you at the cafe on Main Street at noon," I offered. "Perfect, thank you. I'll see you then." She hung up abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone in confusion. What could Jennifer possibly want to discuss with me, alone, that couldn't be said over the phone? And why the urgency? I spent the morning alternating between curiosity and apprehension about the upcoming meeting. Jennifer and I had never been close, even in the early days of her relationship with Michael. She had always maintained a polite but distinct distance, treating me with the kind of careful courtesy one might show a helpful but slightly embarrassing relative. The cafe was busy when I arrived, holiday shoppers seeking respite from the cold. Jennifer was already seated at a corner table, a cup of something untouched in front of her. She looked up as I approached, and I was struck by how tired she appeared, with shadows under her eyes and a tightness around her mouth I hadn't seen before. "Thank you for coming," she said as I took the seat across from her. "Can I get you something to drink?" "I'll get it myself in a moment," I replied, setting my purse down. "Jennifer, what's going on? You seemed upset on the phone." She glanced around the cafe as if checking for familiar faces, then leaned forward slightly. "Michael doesn't know I'm meeting you," she said in a low voice, "and I'd prefer he didn't find out." My concern deepened. "Is everything all right between you two?" "No," she said bluntly. "Nothing is all right. That's why I'm here." She took a deep breath, then continued. "Barbara, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me, even if the truth is difficult to hear." I nodded cautiously. "I'll try." "Did you know about the gambling?" The question caught me completely, off guard. "Gambling? What gambling?" Jennifer studied my face intently, then seemed to deflate slightly. "You really didn't know. I was afraid maybe you'd been covering for him all these years." "Jennifer, I have no idea what you're talking about," I said firmly. "What gambling? Are you saying Michael has a gambling problem?" She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with a determined expression. "Yes. I discovered it about 2 years ago, when our credit card was declined at a restaurant. When I checked our account, there were dozens of transactions at online betting sites, poker rooms, sports books. My mind reeled, trying to process this revelation. "Did you confront him?" "Of course. He swore it was just a hobby that had gotten out of hand, that he was going to stop immediately. He seemed so genuinely remorseful that I believed him." She gave a bitter laugh. "I was an idiot." "So he didn't stop," I said, beginning to see the picture more clearly. "He might have, for a while. But then, about 8 months ago, I noticed the same pattern starting again. When I confronted him this time, he got angry, defensive, said I was overreacting, that he had it under control, that his investments would cover any temporary shortfalls." "Investments?" I echoed, remembering the vague references Michael had made to financial strategies and opportunities he was pursuing. Jennifer nodded grimly. Non-existent investments, just another lie to cover his tracks. She paused, taking a sip of her cooling drink. After that second confrontation, he got more careful. Started using accounts I didn't have access to, took out cash advances, who knows what else. And the mortgage payments I was making? I asked, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. The money for the home equity line of credit? Some of it went to our actual expenses, Jennifer acknowledged. But a lot of it, especially the larger sums. She trailed off, unable to meet my eyes. He was gambling with money I was working extra shifts to provide, I finished for her, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Yes. Jennifer's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, Barbara. I should have told you sooner. I was too embarrassed, too proud, and honestly, too scared of what would happen to our life, our status, if the truth came out. I sat back in my chair, trying to absorb the magnitude of this deception. The late nights Michael had claimed were work-related, the urgent requests for money that couldn't wait, the vague explanations about where previous funds had gone. It all suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. How bad is it? I finally asked. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Bad. The mortgage is 4 months behind now, not just the 1 month you knew about. We're facing foreclosure. The home equity line you paid off? He's already taken out another one behind my back. The credit cards are maxed out. My car is at risk of repossession. Does he acknowledge he has a problem? She shook her head miserably. He still insists he's about to win it all back, that he has a system, that this is just a rough patch. Classic addict talk. I've been researching it. What about your parents? I asked. Surely they would help if they knew the situation. Jennifer's expression hardened. They can't know. My father would disown me. Gambling it's the one thing he considers absolutely beyond the pale. His own father was a compulsive gambler who lost the family business before my dad rebuilt it. If he knew I'd married someone with the same problem. She shuddered. So that's why you've been so concerned with appearances, with maintaining your lifestyle despite the financial strain, I said, pieces clicking into place. Jennifer looked down at her hands. I know how it must look to you, spending money on furniture and vacations while asking you to keep paying the mortgage. But the furniture was purchased on credit. I had no idea how bad things were until recently, and the ski trip was mostly paid for by my parents as an early Christmas gift. I couldn't turn it down without raising questions. I took a moment to process everything Jennifer had shared. The resentment I had been harboring toward her shifted slightly as I recognized that she, too, had been a victim of Michael's deception, albeit in a different way. Why are you telling me this now? I asked finally. Because I'm at my breaking point, she admitted, a tremor in her voice. Last night, Michael didn't come home until after 3 a.m. When I confronted him, he admitted he'd lost another $5,000 at a casino outside of town. Money we absolutely don't have. She took a shuddering breath, clearly struggling to maintain her composure. I told him he needed to get help, to join Gamblers Anonymous, to talk to a therapist, something. He refused, said I was overreacting, that every successful man has setbacks, that his parents, meaning you, would bail us out again if necessary. The casual entitlement in that statement, the assumption that I would simply step in to cover his gambling losses, made my blood boil. When I pointed out that you had made it clear you wouldn't be providing more financial support, he became ugly, said things I never thought I'd hear from him. Jennifer's voice dropped even lower. He implied that if I were a better wife, more supportive, more like the women in my family's social circle, he wouldn't need to escape through gambling. Anger flared in me at the emotional manipulation Michael was employing. That's textbook addict behavior, Jennifer. Blaming others for their own choices. She nodded. I know that now, but that doesn't make it hurt any less. She looked up at me, her expression more open and vulnerable than I had ever seen it. "Barbara, I don't know what to do. I'm scared. Not just of the financial ruin, but of who Michael is becoming. The lying, the manipulation, the anger when confronted. It's like living with a stranger wearing my husband's face." In that moment, I saw beyond the polished exterior Jennifer had always presented, beyond the social climbing and status consciousness, to the frightened woman underneath, someone facing the collapse of her marriage, her financial security, and the future she had envisioned for herself. "Have you considered separation?" I asked gently. "Every day for the past week," she admitted. "But I'm terrified of what comes next, of telling my parents, of the social fallout, of starting over at 32 with a mountain of debt that isn't even mine." I reached across the table and took her hand, surprising both of us. "Jennifer, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you that I've recently learned it's never too late to prioritize your own well-being, to set boundaries, to choose a healthier path even when it's frightening and uncertain." She squeezed my hand gratefully. "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. You've seemed different lately, stronger, more decisive. I admire how you've stood your ground despite the pressure Michael and I, and my parents, have put on you." "It hasn't been easy," I acknowledged, "but it's been necessary." "I think I need to find that same courage," Jennifer said quietly. "I can't continue like this. The constant anxiety, the lies, the walking on eggshells." She looked at me directly. "Barbara, I'm sorry for how I've treated you, for the dismissiveness, the exclusion, for not recognizing the sacrifices you were making. I was so focused on impressing my parents, on maintaining this image of success, that I lost sight of what actually matters." The apology, unexpected and seemingly sincere, eased something within me that had been knotted with hurt and resentment. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "It means a lot." We sat in silence for a moment, the busy cafe continuing its holiday. Bustle around us. "What will you do now?" I finally asked. Jennifer straightened her shoulders, a new resolve visible in her expression. "I've made an appointment with a therapist who specializes in addiction issues. For myself, not Michael. I need to understand why I've enabled this behavior, why I've prioritized appearances over reality for so long." I nodded encouragingly. "That sounds like a positive step. And I'm meeting with a financial advisor next week to understand exactly what we're facing and what options might be available." She hesitated, then added, "I've also started looking at apartments, small ones, in areas my parents would never visit, just in case I need an exit strategy." "If you need help with any of that, I'm here," I found myself offering, surprising myself with the sincerity of the sentiment. Despite everything, Jennifer was still family, still connected to me through Michael, and she was showing a courage and self-awareness I hadn't expected. "Thank you," she said, her eyes glistening. "That means more than you know." She glanced at her watch. "I should go. Michael will be wondering where I am." As we stood to leave, Jennifer hesitated, then impulsively hugged me. "I really am sorry, Barbara, for everything." "I know," I said, returning the embrace. "And Jennifer? Whatever you decide to do, make sure it's what's right for you, not what will please your parents or maintain appearances or even save your marriage. You deserve a life free from fear and deception." She nodded, blinking back tears. I'm starting to believe that. After Jennifer left, I remained at the cafe, ordering a coffee I didn't really want, needing time to process everything I had learned. Michael's gambling addiction cast our entire history in a new and disturbing light. How long had it been going on? How much of my financial support had fueled his addiction rather than building the stable future I had imagined? And what did this mean for my relationship with my son moving forward? Could I support him emotionally through recovery without being drawn back into financial entanglements? Was recovery even possible if he continued to deny the severity of his problem? These questions swirled in my mind as I sipped my cooling coffee, watching holiday shoppers bustling past the cafe windows. There were no easy answers, no clear path forward that didn't involve more difficult conversations, more painful realizations. But as I gathered my things to leave, I felt a strange sense of clarity amidst the chaos. The boundaries I had established, the decision to prioritize my own well-being, had been even more necessary than I had realized. Sometimes what looks like abandonment is actually the healthiest form of love, creating the space for truth to emerge, for reality to be faced, for genuine change to become possible. I stepped out into the cold December air, drew a deep breath, and headed home, ready to face whatever came next, not just as Michael's mother or Richard's potential partner or Ellen's new friend, but as Barbara Wilson, a woman finally learning to put herself first. Christmas Eve arrived with a light dusting of snow that transformed Oak Ridge into a scene worthy of a holiday card. I spent the morning baking cookies from my mother's old recipe, ginger molasses with a hint of orange, to bring to Grace's dinner the following day. The familiar scent filled my kitchen, triggering memories of holidays long past, when Michael was small and delighted by the simplest traditions. I wondered how he was spending his Christmas Eve. Had Jennifer told him about our coffee meeting? Was he preparing for the elaborate celebration at the Parkers, or was he somewhere else entirely, feeding the addiction that Jennifer had revealed? My phone rang, interrupting these thoughts. It was my sister, Linda. "Merry Christmas Eve, Barb," she exclaimed warmly. "Just checking in to see how you're doing." "I'm actually doing well," I replied, realizing with mild surprise that it was true. Despite the ongoing situation with Michael and the revelations about his gambling, I felt more at peace than I had in years. "I'm baking Mom's ginger cookies." "Oh, I can almost smell them through the phone," Linda sighed nostalgically. "Remember how she used to let us decorate them with that terrible colored sugar that would get everywhere?" I laughed, the memory vivid and sweet. And Dad would pretend to be annoyed, but would always eat more than anyone else. "Those were good days," Linda said softly. "Speaking of family, any word from Michael?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. Linda and I had grown closer in recent weeks, but I hadn't yet told her about Jennifer's visit or Michael's gambling addiction. "It's complicated," I finally said. "I've learned some things about Michael's situation that are concerning." "What kind of things?" Linda asked, her tone sharpening with worry. I took a deep breath and told her everything: the gambling, Jennifer's secret meeting with me, the extent of their financial troubles that went far beyond what I had initially realized. "Oh, Barbara," Linda said when I finished. "I'm so sorry. That's devastating." "It is," I acknowledged. "But in a strange way, it's also clarifying. The boundaries I've been setting weren't just necessary for my financial security. They may have been the only thing that could bring this issue to light." After hanging up with Linda, I finished packaging the cookies and then decided to take a walk through the neighborhood to enjoy the snow and the holiday decorations. The fresh air would help clear my head before my evening plans. Ellen joined, me, bundled in a red coat with a matching scarf. "The Jensen house outdid themselves this year," she commented as we passed a home with an elaborate light display synchronized to music. "Their electric bill must be astronomical." "It's beautiful, though," I said, admiring the twinkling spectacle. "So," Ellen nudged me playfully, "are you ready for your big Christmas Eve date?" I felt a flutter of excitement. Richard had invited me to dinner at his home, a significant step beyond our previous outings to public venues. "I think so. I bought a new dress yesterday." "Look at you, Barbara Wilson. New dress, holiday romance." I barely recognized my formerly all-work, no-play neighbor. I laughed, but there was truth in her teasing. In the weeks since I had set boundaries with Michael, I had begun reclaiming parts of myself that had been dormant for years: my enjoyment of music, my interest in fashion, my capacity for friendship, and yes, even romance. "Richard's a good man," I said simply. "He makes me feel valued." Richard lived in a Tudor-style home in one of the older, established neighborhoods near the hospital. When I arrived that evening, he greeted me with a warm smile and an appreciative gaze that made me glad I'd splurged on the new emerald green dress. "You look absolutely beautiful," he said, taking my coat. "Please come in." Dinner was served in a formal dining room with candles and a beautiful table setting that Richard admitted he'd fretted over. "I haven't entertained properly in years," he confessed. "I was afraid I'd forgotten how." "It's perfect," I assured him. And it was, from the perfectly cooked prime rib to the thoughtfully paired wine, to the flickering candlelight that cast a gentle glow over everything. "I have a confession to make," Richard said as we were enjoying dessert, a rich chocolate cake he admitted was from the bakery down the street. "I've wanted to invite you to dinner for years." "Years?" I echoed, surprised. "Why didn't you?" He smiled ruefully. "A combination of factors. Professional boundaries, for one. The disparity in our positions at the hospital made me hesitant. And now? Now you're in an administrative role, which creates a more appropriate balance. But more importantly," he added, his expression growing more serious, "you seem more— available isn't quite the right word. More present in your own life, perhaps." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. I was trapped in a cycle of caretaking that didn't leave much room for anything or anyone else. "May I ask what changed?" I considered how much to share, then decided on honesty. Necessity. I worked myself into pneumonia trying to maintain a schedule that let me financially support my son and his wife. When I got sick and asked for a temporary reprieve, their reaction made me realize I had spent years enabling behavior that wasn't healthy for any of us. When he drove me home later, our goodnight kiss was less tentative than before, more confident, a warm, tender exchange that lingered sweetly and carried the promise of more to come. "Merry Christmas, Barbara," he said softly against my ear as he hugged me goodbye. "Merry Christmas, Richard. Thank you for a lovely evening." Inside my house, I moved through the familiar rooms with a sense of contentment that felt both novel and deeply right. The small living Christmas tree twinkled in my front window. Ellen's expertly hung outdoor lights cast a gentle glow across. My porch, and now Richard's thoughtful gift, a volume of Mary Oliver poetry, waited on my bedside table to be explored more fully. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message from Jennifer. "Can we talk tomorrow? It's important. Michael found out about our coffee meeting and things have escalated. I need advice." My heart sank. So much for a peaceful Christmas day. I replied quickly, "Of course. What time works for you?" Her response came immediately. "Early, if possible. 8 a.m.? I can meet you at your house before Michael wakes up." Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the early sun glinting off the fresh snow. Jennifer stood on my porch at precisely 8 o'clock, her face pale and drawn, dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept well. "Thank you for seeing me," she said as I ushered her inside. "Especially today." "Of course," I replied, leading her to the kitchen where the coffee was ready. "What's going on? Your text sounded urgent." "Michael found out about our meeting. Someone saw us at the cafe and mentioned it to him." Jennifer's hands tightened around her mug. When I told him I had only shared the truth about his gambling, he became volatile. "Volatile how?" I asked, alarm rising. "Jennifer, did he hurt you?" "Not physically," she said quickly, "but he said terrible things. Called me ungrateful, disloyal. Said I was just like you, only interested in controlling him, in making him look bad." She met my eyes directly. He threatened to tell my parents everything if I didn't fix things with you immediately. Fix things meaning convince you to resume the financial support. He seems to think if I apologize enough, grovel enough, you'll open your checkbook again. She let out a bitter laugh. As if that would solve anything at this point. What did you tell him? That I wouldn't do it. That even if you agreed, which I told him was extremely unlikely, it would just be enabling his addiction. Jennifer set her mug down carefully. That's when he really lost it, started throwing things, breaking dishes. I waited until he left the house and then packed a bag. I spent the night in a hotel. I need a place to stay temporarily, she said in a rush, just for a few days until I can talk to my parents and figure out next steps. The hotel is expensive, and I need to be careful with money right now. The request caught me off guard. Jennifer wanted to stay with me? The same woman who had deemed me not polished enough to sit at her Christmas table now wanted to shelter under my roof? The guest room is small, I said finally, and not nearly as elegant as what you're used to, but you're welcome to stay as long as you need to. Relief washed over Jennifer's face. Thank you, Barbara, truly. I promise I won't be in your way. While Jennifer retrieved her suitcase, I quickly called Grace to explain that I needed to reschedule our Christmas dinner. With characteristic warmth, Grace insisted she would simply bring dinner to us instead. No one should be alone on Christmas, especially not someone going through such a difficult time, she declared. I'll be over around 4 with food for everyone, and I'll bring Ellen too. She mentioned her children couldn't make it this year. Around noon, the doorbell rang. When I answered, I was startled to find Michael standing on my porch, his expression a mixture of anger and desperation. Where is she? He demanded without preamble. Is Jennifer here? I stepped outside, partially closing the door behind me to prevent him from barging in. Michael, this isn't the way to handle whatever is happening between you and Jennifer. So she is here, he said, his voice rising. I knew it. She's turned you against me completely, hasn't she? Filled your head with lies about me? No one has turned me against you, I said calmly, though my heart was racing. But Jennifer needs some space right now, and I think you should respect that. Michael let out a bitter laugh. Space, right. More like she's hiding from the mess she helped create. Did she tell you she maxed out her own credit cards too? That she was happy enough to enjoy the lifestyle when things were going well? Michael, I said firmly, you need help. Professional help. For your gambling addiction. His face contorted with fury. I don't have an addiction. I have investments that haven't paid off yet. I have temporary financial setbacks. That's not the same thing. Investments? I echoed incredulously. Is that what you call losing thousands of dollars at casinos? Is that what you call taking cash advances on credit cards to place more bets when you're already drowning in debt? We stood facing each other on the porch, the festive holiday wreath on my door an incongruous backdrop to this painful confrontation. In Michael's eyes, I could see the war being waged between the desperate addict seeking his next fix and the son who, somewhere beneath the chaos of addiction, still respected his mother enough to heed her words. I think you should leave now, I said firmly. Come back when you're calmer, when you're ready to have a real conversation about getting help. I'm not leaving without talking to Jennifer, he insisted, trying to push past me to the door. I stood my ground. Yes, you are. This is my home and I'm asking you to leave. If you refuse, I'll have no choice but to call the police. Michael's eyes widened with disbelief. You'd call the cops on your own son? On Christmas Day? I don't want to, I said truthfully. But I will, if that's what it takes to maintain boundaries and keep everyone safe. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine, I'll go. But tell Jennifer this isn't over. She can't just walk away from our marriage without consequences. The implied threat sent a chill through me. What does that mean, Michael? Are you threatening Jennifer? He backpedaled quickly, perhaps realizing how his words had sounded. I'm not threatening anyone. I just mean there are financial and legal complications she's not considering. Community property laws, shared debt, all of that. I wasn't entirely convinced by this explanation, but I nodded. I'll tell her you stopped by. Now please, go home and think about what I've said. About getting help. Michael turned to leave, then paused. Merry Christmas, Mom, he said, his voice suddenly small and lost, like the child he had once been. I'm sorry it turned out like this. I'm sorry too, I replied softly. I love you, Michael. I always will. But I can't support behaviors that are harmful to you or others. Back inside, I found Jennifer standing at the bottom of the stairs, her face pale with tension. I heard everything, she said. I'm so sorry. You had to deal with that. It's not your fault, I assured her. Michael's actions are his own responsibility, not yours. She nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. Did you mean what you said? About calling the police if he wouldn't leave? Yes, I said simply. I've learned recently that sometimes caring for someone means setting firm boundaries, even when it's painful. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Thank you for standing up for me, for giving me a safe place to stay, for everything. I reached out and squeezed her arm gently. That's what family does, and despite everything, we are still family, Jennifer. Something shifted in her expression then, a softening, an opening. Yes, she said quietly. I suppose we are. Later that afternoon, as promised, Grace arrived with a car full of food and holiday cheer. Ellen accompanied her, bringing additional side dishes and a homemade apple pie. Richard arrived shortly after with a chocolate Yule log from the city's best bakery and a bottle of champagne. I thought we might need something to celebrate the simple fact of being together, he explained as he handed me the bottle. Our impromptu Christmas dinner turned out to be unlike any holiday gathering I had ever experienced. Around my dining room table sat a collection of people who, just weeks earlier, would have seemed an unlikely assembly. My neighbor Ellen, my friend Grace, my new romantic interest Richard, and my daughter-in-law Jennifer, who was in the process of separating from my son. Yet despite the unusual circumstances, or perhaps because of them, the meal was filled with warmth, genuine conversation, and moments of unexpected joy. Jennifer, initially quiet and withdrawn, gradually relaxed as the afternoon progressed, even laughing at Ellen's outrageous stories about her online dating adventures. You should have seen this one fellow, Ellen declared, gesturing dramatically with her fork. Claimed in his profile to be a fitness enthusiast. Showed up to our coffee date having clearly not moved from his couch in a decade, wearing sweatpants with mysterious stains. As everyone laughed, I caught Richard watching me from across the table, his eyes warm with admiration and something that looked remarkably like love. He raised his glass slightly in a private toast, and I returned the gesture, feeling a surge of gratitude for his presence in my life. After dinner, Jennifer asked if she could call her parents. I think I'm ready to talk to them, she said. Of course, I replied, touched that she had asked my permission in my own home. You can use the den for privacy if you'd like. Jennifer emerged about 20 minutes later, her eyes red but her expression one of profound relief. They're coming. Tomorrow, she said quietly. My parents. They want to talk in person. How did they take the news? I asked gently. Better than I expected, she admitted. Shocked, of course. Angry at Michael, but supportive of me. My dad actually said he was proud of me for having the courage to face the truth. When our guests finally departed and Jennifer retired to the guest room, I sat alone in my living room reflecting on the extraordinary turn my life had taken. 6 weeks ago, I was working myself to exhaustion to pay for a lifestyle that wasn't mine, desperately hoping to be included in my son's Christmas celebration. Tonight, I had hosted my own gathering, welcomed my daughter-in-law into my home during her moment of crisis, and begun a promising new relationship with a man who saw and valued me for exactly who I was. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Michael's addiction would require a long and difficult recovery process, if he even accepted help. Jennifer faced the painful dismantling of her marriage and the social fallout she feared, and I would need to navigate my role in supporting both of them without enabling destructive patterns or sacrificing my own well-being. But for the first time in years, perhaps ever, I felt equal to these challenges. I had discovered a strength in myself I hadn't known existed, the courage to set boundaries, to prioritize my needs, to stand firm in the face of manipulation and guilt. 3 months later, on a warm spring day, I stood in my backyard surrounded by the members of the newly formed Oak Ridge Garden Club. Ellen was demonstrating proper pruning techniques, while Grace distributed seedlings she had started in her greenhouse. Richard, now a regular presence in my life, was helping install a trellis against the back fence where I planned to grow climbing roses. Jennifer, who had moved into her own apartment but remained a frequent visitor, was carefully planting herbs in a raised bed we had built together. Her divorce proceedings were underway, complicated by Michael's continued financial irresponsibility, but proceeding nonetheless. She had found a job at a marketing firm in the city and was slowly rebuilding her life on her own terms, free from the crushing pressure of appearances and expectations. Michael had finally agreed to enter a treatment program after hitting what he called his absolute bottom, gambling away the money his parents-in-law had loaned him for a fresh start. His recovery was in its early stages, marked by setbacks and struggles, but he was trying, and for that, I was grateful. As for me, I had officially retired from St. Mary's, though I still volunteered in the cardiac care unit 1 day a week. The rest of my time was filled with activities I had postponed for decades: travel with Richard, painting classes at the community center, long phone calls with my sister Linda, quiet evenings with a good book. I had canceled their mortgage. Payments, yes, but I had given myself and my son something far more valuable: the chance to build lives based on truth rather than illusion, on genuine connection rather than financial dependence. It wasn't the Christmas I had expected, but it had become the catalyst for the life I had always deserved. That evening, as Richard and I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, he reached over and took my hand. "You know what I admire most about you, Barbara?" he asked. "What's that?" "Your courage, not just in facing difficult situations, but in being willing to change, to grow, to rewrite the story of your life at a time when many people would simply accept the status quo." I smiled, squeezing his hand in response. "It's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. I think I finally understand that." And as the last light of day gilded the garden we had planted together, a garden that would bloom and grow in the months and years to come, I felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with perfect holiday gatherings or social expectations, and everything to do with living authentically, setting healthy boundaries, and finally, after all these years, putting myself on my own list of people who deserved care and consideration. The greatest gift I had given myself wasn't financial freedom, or even the new relationships that now enriched my life. It was the knowledge that I was worthy of respect, from my son, from my daughter-in-law, from the world at large, and most importantly, from myself. A year to the day after that fateful Christmas when I stood my ground, I found myself addressing a small group at the community center. The support group for families of gambling addicts had become an unexpected but vital part of my journey, and today I had been asked to share my story. "It's not easy to love someone with an addiction," I began, looking around at the circle of faces that had become familiar over the months. "It's even harder when that person is your child, someone you've spent a lifetime protecting and supporting." Several people nodded in understanding, their expressions reflecting the same mixture of love and heartache that I had carried. For years, I thought I was helping my son by covering his expenses, by working extra shifts to pay his mortgage. I told myself it was what any good mother would do. I paused, remembering the exhaustion, the pneumonia, the growing resentment I had tried so hard to deny. What I didn't understand was that my financial support wasn't actually helping him. It was enabling behaviors that were destroying him from the inside out. An older man in the back wiped away a tear. His wife had mentioned during a previous meeting that their daughter had lost her home and marriage to gambling debts before finally seeking help. The hardest decision I ever made was to stop paying that mortgage, to let my son face the consequences of his actions. It felt like abandonment. It felt like failure. Every instinct I had as a mother screamed against it. I took a deep breath. But it was actually the most loving thing I could have done, though none of us could see it at the time. After the meeting, a woman approached me, her hands clutching her purse tightly. "My son hasn't spoken to me in 3 months," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not since I refused to co-sign another loan for him. I keep wondering if I did the right thing." I gently placed my hand over hers. "I wish I could tell you it gets easier quickly, but the truth is that recovery, both for the addict and for us as family members, is a long, uneven process. There are good days and difficult ones." I smiled softly. "But I can tell you that standing firm in your boundaries is an act of courage, not cruelty." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Thank you. I needed to hear that today." Walking home through the crisp winter air, I reflected on how much had changed since last Christmas. Michael was 6 months sober now, attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings regularly and working with a financial counselor to address the mountain of debt he had accumulated. Our relationship was cautiously rebuilding, different than before, but perhaps healthier in many ways. Jennifer had finalized her divorce in October. She had moved to an apartment downtown, started a small marketing consultancy, and was dating a kind accountant she had met through her therapist's recommendation. She still came over for Sunday dinners occasionally, her relationship with me having evolved into something neither of us could have predicted, a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences. Thomas and Diana Parker, surprisingly, had eventually become allies in Michael's recovery process. After their initial shock and horror at the gambling addiction that had nearly destroyed their daughter's life, they had educated themselves, joining the same support group I attended, and even funding a treatment program at the local hospital for others struggling with the same issues. As I approached my home, I spotted Richard clearing snow from my driveway. He looked up as I neared, his face breaking into a warm smile that still made my heart skip. "How was the meeting?" he asked, leaning his shovel against the garage. "Good. Important." I reached for his gloved hand. "I think it helped some people." "I have no doubt," he said, giving my fingers a gentle squeeze. "You have a way of offering hope without minimizing the struggle." We walked toward the house together, our breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Through the front window, I could see the Christmas tree twinkling, surrounded by the presents we had wrapped the night before. This year, Michael would join us for Christmas dinner, along with Jennifer, who had insisted it wouldn't be awkward, Grace and her husband, Ellen, and Linda, who was driving in from Ohio with her new boyfriend. "I was thinking," Richard said as we stomped snow from our boots on the porch, "about our conversation last night. About Sedona in the spring." We had been discussing a vacation, our first real trip together. "No, about the house." He looked slightly nervous, which was unusual for his typically composed demeanor. "I meant what I said. I think we should do it." The "it" in question was selling both our houses and buying a new place together, a significant step in our relationship, one that acknowledged both our desire to build a life together and the practical realities of our age and circumstances. "I think you're right," I said, surprising myself with how certain I felt. It's time. Richard's face lit up. Really? You're sure? I'm sure. I reached up to touch his cheek. This past year has taught me that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that feel frightening at first, but ultimately lead to growth and joy. As we stepped into the warmth of my home, soon to be just one chapter in my history rather than the container for my entire life, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for Richard and our deepening relationship, but for the difficult journey that had brought me here, the courage to set boundaries, the willingness to face painful truths, the capacity to begin again even when the path forward wasn't clear. 1 year ago, I had canceled mortgage payments and inadvertently set in motion a cascade of changes that transformed not just my life, but the lives of everyone connected to me. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments of doubt and heartache along the way. But standing here now, on the threshold of a new chapter filled with possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine, I knew without question that it had been worth it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.